For more on these claims and the challenges ahead, let me turn to Patrick Borchers, a law professor at Creighton University. He was the principal investigator on a U.S. study looking at the resolution of claims of U.S. citizens against the Cuban government. Patrick, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
So what is going to happen to these thousands of claims from Americans whose properties were seized decades ago?
Well, as one of your earlier commentators was saying, there are no crystal balls. I think you did a nice job of setting it up. It's going to be a very long process. One of the things that we proposed in our report was to create a binational panel that would look into them and hopefully find some ways to resolve the claims in a way that would stimulate the Cuban economy and give some recompense to people who lost property.
And it seems just because Cuba and U.S. have started to normalize relations, there are some very difficult challenges still ahead. And as you mentioned, it sounds like this is not something that can be resolved anytime soon.
No, I don't. Clearly, you're right. I think it's going to take a long-run process. The amount of the claims is very large, certainly much larger than it's likely that Cuba could pay in currency. So one of the things we suggested is that for companies or individuals who have, in particular, the large claims, that they be allowed to do business in Cuba. And hopefully that would stimulate the Cuban economy, help lift the living standard of the ordinary Cuban person, and give some measure of recompense to the claimants.
And Patrick, Cuba, as we heard in Michael Voss's package in his report, Cuba has plenty of claims of its own against the United States.
They do, and we suggested that the panel be able to hear both Cuban claims and U.S. claims. I think it's going to be a very hard job, and rightly so, to persuade the American government that they owe Cuba something like $200 billion on the embargo. But there are some claims from assets that were seized in American banks and so on. So we are trying to set up something that we hope will be fair for both sides, that will eventually resolve the matter. And one of the principles that we all agreed on when we started on this report was we wanted to propose something that would be fair to everybody and not hurt the ordinary Cuban citizen or the ordinary U.S. citizen who had lost property.
So how would you go about doing that? I know that's probably $1 million question, but these Cubans who live in these apartments, I mean, the idea of them losing their homes, I'm sure that's not something they ever want to do.
Yes, and in fact, we specifically addressed that in the report and said that there should be no specific restitution of a property. To give one example, Starwood Hotels, a large hotel chain in the United States, is the holder now of the AT&T claim. While I think Starwood would probably prefer to have some development rights in Cuba along the beaches as opposed to having an old radio tower back. So we're trying to propose something that would be a win-win, but it's going to be a long process. It's a long journey from raising a flag to actually getting back to having a productive relationship.
Well, hopefully that one is not going to take some 54 years. Patrick Borchers, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. An honor to be on.